Now, a discussion of gun laws and the Second Amendment from the Leadership Program of the Rockies in Colorado Springs. This is an hour.
There are a few topics that capture the national conversation with more ideas, thoughts, and emotions than gun laws in this country. And I'm pleased to announce a very distinguished and unique panel that is here to discuss this very issue right now. Our panel is entitled Our Second Amendment, a Guarantee of Freedom. To speak on this topic, allow me to introduce our speakers. I'll just go ahead and read the introductions as we introduce them all in order. Okay, here we go. Mary Katherine Hamm, who has spoken here at LPR, I think, 2 years ago? Yeah, 2 years ago. Editor-at-large at Hot Air and a contributing editor at Town Hall Magazine. She brings to our panel a deep understanding of the national media politics on gun control. On any given day, you've probably seen her on the Fox News Channel taking on some big names from the left. Most recently, Mary Katherine made national headlines when she had a heated debate with Juan Williams about the politics and facts of gun laws in this country. David Kopel is here. He's a research director with the Independence Institute, an associate policy analyst with the Cato Institute in Washington, and adjunct professor of advanced constitutional law at the University of Denver's Sturm College of Law. Before joining the Independence Institute, Kopel served as an assistant attorney general for the state of Colorado. Dave is nationally recognized for his expertise in firearms policy. Kopel's book, The Samurai, the Mountie, and the Cowboy, Should America Adopt the Gun Controls of Other Democracies, was named Book of the Year by the American Society of Criminology, Division of International Criminology. As a resident of Colorado and expert on firearms policy, Dave will bring an interesting and resourced viewpoint on the issue of gun control from the point of view of a Coloradan seeing all these new gun laws being made right here at home and under our Gold Dome. Trevor Burrus is a research fellow at the Cato Institute's Center for Constitutional Studies based in Washington, D.C. His research interests include constitutional law and criminal law. His work has appeared in several newspapers, magazines, and law reviews. He has ties to the state of Colorado. He holds a BA in philosophy from the University of Colorado at Boulder and a JD from the University of Denver Sturm College of Law. Trevor's is often the go-to expert by the Washington, D.C. media on firearms policy. His background is a perfect fit to explain the firearms policies and laws being proposed at the national level today. Jeanne Assam, last but certainly not least, Jeanne Assam is the police officer who shot and killed a gunman who entered New Life Church right here in Colorado Springs on December 9th, 2007. Jeanne engaged in a shootout inside the church and is credited with saving countless lives that day. Her background includes several years as a patrol officer with the Minneapolis Police Department, criminal investigator for the state of Colorado, and as a parole officer for the Colorado Department of Corrections. In January of 2008, she met with former President George W. Bush at the president's request. She is also the recipient of the Eleanor Roosevelt Award from the Second Amendment Foundation. Jeanne wrote her first book called of her experience entitled God, the Gunman, and Me. Needless to say, Jeanne's experience brings an incredibly personal perspective to the issue of firearms policy. Please help me welcome our panelists today. So Mary Katherine, why don't we start with you?
Hello, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be in Colorado. I'm a total sucker for Colorado, so anytime you guys need me, just holler. I love it here. And it's a pleasure to be on this panel with folks who, frankly, know a lot more about this issue than I do, and especially with Jeanne over here, bona fide hero. So it's exciting to be here with you guys as well. The toughest fire I go up against is Juan Williams, so just kidding, Juan. Yes, last week I did get into a fiery debate with Juan. It's actually about as close as I get to biting someone's head off on TV, because he implied, of course, and you'll recognize this strategy, somewhat disappointingly to me, because we are actually friends in real life. He implied that I did not care about victims of gun violence because I happen to believe the Second Amendment is useful and, part of the Constitution. Useful particularly to me as a woman if I'd like to protect myself at some point. He turned this into, why don't you care about people who die in Washington, D.C. of gun violence? And this is where I want to say, I think during this particular debate, post-Newtown, post-Aurora, that gun control advocates have, of course, gone down that road. And I think Second Amendment advocates have done a good job of repeatedly asking them, you show me how this helps. You show me how this changes anything. If you watched Ben Shapiro up against Piers Morgan on CNN, he just crushed him. And he crushed him because he made very logical arguments. He didn't get cowed into saying, well, of course we should do something. Because the fact is, doing something, which is, say, the assault weapons ban, which didn't prevent Columbine when it was a national piece of legislation, which did not prevent Newtown when it was a state piece of legislation. Looking at the situation and saying, we must do something, this is something, let's do it, is not sufficient. In fact, I would argue that when you look at Chicago or Washington, D.C., that enacting these same laws again that have demonstrably failed and do not protect the exact people you claim to want to protect, that you are edging from silliness into criminal negligence. You're disarming people, you're taking people's freedoms away, and you are doing absolutely nothing to help the people you claim to want to help. So don't tell me I don't care. You tell me what you're doing, taking my rights away to not fix a problem. So I think turning that around and doing it calmly and asserting, I do care about these people. The proof of that is that I would like to do something that works. I would like to examine, for instance, deeper social issues at work, both in Newtown with a single isolated shooter or in a gang war in Chicago. I would like to examine that and maybe put in some public policies that might actually work instead of something that takes my gun away while I'm sitting in Virginia, which is not going to do anyone any good. So I think it's been, although emotional at times, I think actually keeping our heads about us, asserting that we are normal people just like you, that the NRA, for instance, is not some extremist lobby. It is a group of millions of Americans who have come together to assert a right. I think personalizing ourselves and not just letting the only human beings be on the other side of the equation is important. One area where I think the left can get into very dangerous territory, as you guys have seen with certain Mr. Salazar in Colorado recently, is when talking about self-defense for women. This is a perfectly plausible situation that many people can imagine. When you're going back to the Constitution and you're explaining the original rationale, maybe that doesn't reach everyone on the Second Amendment. But a lot of middle class, sort of upper middle class women who have been in threatening situations, who have felt this way before, will say, hey, that does make sense, that I don't want to take that away from my fellow women. And hearing Democrats downplay the threat of rape and want to take away those rights from women, I think is very damaging to them. And it is our job to make very clear that that is something they want to do. The Second Amendment community has done a very good job of inviting and welcoming women in. And the percentage, I think, of women who own guns has gone from 13 to 23% over just, maybe the last decade or so. That's really impressive, and it means that owning a gun is something those people can relate to. You can't make it so spooky and scary. And that also, when they become part of the Second Amendment community and they own a gun, they understand the huge web of laws that already exists, that often ensnares innocent gun owners who are trying to do the right thing in good faith. And I think one of the things that we can do is explain that giant web, point it out over and over again, because these calls for common sense gun control often survive based on the fact that people who don't own guns don't know there are any laws. They just think it's the wild, wild west when in fact it's highly regulated. And the last point I want to make is that, hope I'm not trying to steal everybody's time here, is that in drafting a lot of this legislation that they're doing in states, Democrats are making some huge mistakes that we need to exploit on a national level. Well, for instance, the publishing of the gun owners in New York made quite a splash and is a very good teachable moment for why we don't think things like national registration of gun owners is a good idea. They will reveal themselves, as they did in Washington state, where the legislation in that state obliterated the Fourth Amendment for gun owners by saying a sheriff can come into your house once a year without a warrant to make sure your gun is locked up properly. That has not passed, and now all the liberals who sponsored it are going, oh, we didn't know that was in there. We, of course, never meant to do this. But I think those kind of mistakes, when they get too emotional and they get so excited that the politics have changed on this issue, which, by the way, they have not, you can catch them in these moments, and I think that works well for our side of the argument.
Well, thank you, Mayor Katherine. I'm excited to be here. I am a Colorado native. I went to D.C. to work at the Cato Institute, but I love coming back here because this is where my heart is. Since I've been in D.C., there's been 2 hurricanes and an earthquake, so I think God's aim is getting a little better on where Gomorrah is. But Mayor Katherine had some excellent points, and I'm going to dovetail on those a little bit for the broader conversation. I do a lot of these things, and usually I don't have as friendly of audience. I usually assume that everyone thinks I'm crazy when I open my mouth because I'm coming from the libertarian standpoint. And so when I talk to people who are gun control advocates, I try and get in their head. And one of the things that I've realized about gun control advocates is that they're not really in their heads, they're in their hearts. And that's fine. We should be in our hearts too, as has been said previously today. But there's a psychologist from New York University named Jonathan Haidt who's talked about, so some people might be familiar with his work, how political beliefs have multiple reasons for them. And there's one element of political beliefs that's sacredness. And when something is being a putrefaction, a contaminant. And the simple fact is that for gun control advocates, what they feel towards guns is disgust. They react to them like a cobra, curled up, don't want to go near it, don't want to touch it. And this is not very constructive for the debate we need to have in this country, because when you say we're going to put guns in schools, for example, to stop other guns in schools, their immediate thought is contamination. And that's fine, but what really isn't contaminant is Adam Lanza. When someone goes into a gun-free zone, which by itself is just a discussion of a contaminant-free zone, like a diversity zone. And when someone goes into one of those victim zones, one of the silliest ideas that exists right now, and kills a bunch of kids. And there's another thing that guides gun control advocates too, which is the view for prohibition. I talk to a lot of crowds and I ask people 2 questions: who's disgusted by guns? And I get a lot of hands. And the other one is, who thinks that a civilized society would have no guns in private hands? And you get a lot of hands with that. And that demonstrates what is actually a culture war. What we're really fighting here is a culture war. We're fighting a trust in government that the left has been growing over the years, and a trust in the fact that people don't need the right to defend themselves, and we can rely completely on the police, and also we can rely on Obamacare, we can rely on the public school system, and all these things that the government fails us in constantly, and then taking away our ability to actualize our own preferences. The prohibition talk is not super high as it used to be in the 60s. And I think there are a lot of people on the left who say, oh, shotguns and hunting rifles are okay, but they want to live in a Star Trek universe where no guns are needed, and that will never happen. I have sympathy for that idea. I like Star Trek too. It will never happen. There are 300 million guns in this country. There is no button to take away guns in this country. There is no magic button. And that's really what you hear when you hear some astounding claims, because we're winning this debate on data, unquestionably. Things are just off the table. The national, the government's own data talks about how the assault weapons ban did nothing. And they know that. I recently watched The West Wing. I started watching it. I figured I had to do that in D.C. The 5th episode of The West Wing, they introduce an assault weapons ban, and then they sit around talking about how they know it will do nothing. And then what do they say? but it's a start. A start to what? Arguably the most responsibly owned gun in this country. About 343 people died of rifles at all in 2011. 500 people died of blunt objects. It has to be discussed animating this to make this rational, well, emotional. It has to be discussed because it makes no sense otherwise. If you imagine a national debate, a culture war over swimming pools, and if there are a bunch of people who are totally disgusted by swimming pools, which kill far more children, for example, in accidents than guns do, you would be having a culture war about swimming pools. And on the other side, you'd say, well, swimming pools are good. They make people happy. They're fun things. And they say, well, that's worth the cost. Here's the other thing about the culture war. They do not understand anyone who likes to use weapons for sporting reasons. It's if you liked dogfighting or bear baiting. That's what they think. There's no weight whatsoever. Wanting sports use of guns, hunting, going to a firing range, having a gun in your house, that has no weight. Balancing rights when we get to the Constitution, you usually say, would we weigh the value of speaking for the speaker against the First Amendment, whatever? Well, there's no weight on this side. That's why this is a culture war, and that's why this is very difficult to fight on a national level. And one thing we have to be aware of is they're trying to win it through a lot of surreptitious means. Why is it that children are expelled from school or sent home for a week for using their hands like a gun or playing cops and robbers? Because they want to engender disgust in everyone about guns. There were shooting clubs in high schools until the late 60s. Anyone a part of the shooting club here? Yes. Can you imagine now the way they treat guns in the public school system? We used to have responsible firearm ownership. We still do, but we had a culture that was widespread of responsible firearm ownership, and it worked across blue states and red states. Now it's pretty much centered in red states, and it's very disturbing. So the way of winning this war, and we will win this on the national level, by the way, the NRA is an amazing organization that's power is there because they have 4.5 million voters who believe in the right to self-defense and believe that guns are not the problem, it's people who shoot. And another point, I want to put this out with Jeanne on the panel here. I tell Jeanne's story all the time as a trying way to explain away some of the benefits, or explain some of the benefits we have for guns. And I think everyone in this room needs to know Jeanne's name, and we need to make her a household name in a way that Adam Lanza is not. Or is. We need to make her a household name. We need to make all the people who defended people over the years a household name and not glorify these killers for creating copycats. So we're going to win this. Nothing's going to pass. What Obama needs for the Senate to do this, well, maybe not nothing, possibly background checks. I think Dave can talk a little more about that. But he needs votes from Alaska, Montana, Louisiana, Arkansas, and North Carolina, senators there who are not going to vote against the responsible gun owners in their districts. So I'm pretty optimistic about nothing passing on a national level. What I do think we need to talk about is the fact that gun violence is bigger than mass shootings in this country. And it's created by things that no one ever talks about. A failed and shameful drug war, a failed public school system that leads people to avenues for violence, for success, and government policies that have been destroying communities in this country for 40 years, whether it's eminent domain or the welfare state. All of those things, one of the best solutions to interpersonal violence is a sense of shame that you have in your community. And all of those things are being eradicated throughout our country. That's where the debate should be had over the problem of gun violence in this country. We should realize these are tragic situations with Newtown, but those could be stopped tomorrow. We could turn them into armed fortresses. The problem is it's actually not worth it, because we'd be taking where gun violence is really a problem in this country in inner cities. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to leave it on to Dave, who is actually my mentor and taught me everything I know about guns. So he can cake it up from here. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, I have a little more of a pro-government view than perhaps some folks, because as an attorney at the U.S. Supreme Court and the Federal Circuit Courts of Appeal and in the Colorado Supreme Court, I represent law enforcement organizations. I represented the County Sheriffs of Colorado in the Colorado Supreme Court in the case involving the University of Colorado's illegal attempt to ban licensed carry on campus. I've represented in many courts, including the U.S. Supreme Court, the two major police training organizations in the United States, the International Law Enforcement Educators and Trainers Association and the International Association of Law Enforcement Firearms Instructors, and a large number of other law enforcement organizations, such as the Maryland Fraternal Order of Police, the Southern States Police Benevolent Association, and on and on. And sadly, my clients have been on the losing side in Colorado this week. All 62 elected sheriffs in the state of Colorado, which includes Democrats and Republicans, unanimously asked our state legislature, don't pass something this year, don't do things in a rush. If you want to do anything, let's have some study and bring people together and talk about things. And further, the particular proposals, the sheriffs said, are all bad ideas. Well, the sheriffs got ignored in the legislature. The legislature rushed things through. The bills were introduced towards the end of one week, had the hearings the next week, and then were quickly moved as fast as possible onto the floor of the House for second and third reading. Because what's going on in Colorado is not an indigenous gun control movement. What's going on is Colorado as the pawn of the Obama, Biden, and Bloomberg plan. Joe Biden called wavering Democratic legislators on the floor of the House while the bill was on second reading and told them, don't worry, you can vote against your district, you can do whatever you want, because next time you're up for election, we've got loads of campaign cash for you. And maybe he's right, because Michael Bloomberg personally has more money than the entire National Rifle Association and probably more than the entire firearms industry in this country, and he can drop unlimited sums into whatever race he wants to. The bills that passed in Colorado are not Colorado-only bills. They are drafted by Michael Bloomberg's people. They are lobbied in Colorado by Michael Bloomberg's contract lobbyists. They are the national model for what President Obama and Mr. Bloomberg are going to try to push in Congress. And yet, if they were actually interested in saving lives, we know none of these bills will work. And how do we know that? Because the Eric Holder's Department of Justice, the research arm of that, is called the National Institute of Justice. And in early January, the National Institute of Justice did a report on various gun control proposals. That report was understandably kept secret from the American people, but it's been leaked and it's available. And here's what the National Institute of Justice said. And again, this is the research arm of the United States Department of Justice. That the ban on so-called assault weapons, which many of you know are only different in superficial characteristics, such as where the grip is on a gun and whether the gun has a black plastic stock that can be adjusted versus a solid wood stock, things like that. The National Institute of Justice said this does nothing. These guns are rarely used in crime. There's no point in doing this. And of course, this confirms the study that was done by researchers selected by Janet Reno, not one of the top pro-gun cabinet officers in American history, to conduct a study on the 1994 to 2004 Feinstein ban on so-called assault weapons and on magazines. And that report, issued with preliminary reports over the years, and then a final report in 2004, said that ban accomplished nothing. No lives were saved that they could see in any statistically discernible way. It didn't change how many shots were fired in confrontations or anything else. They could find, after 10 years, no benefits from the laws. And yet, President Obama, after giving that very good speech at Sandy Hook, about Sandy Hook in Newtown, Connecticut, on the Sunday after the murders, said we have to change. It's unacceptable to continue like this, and I certainly agree with him about that. And yet, what do we have? Something that you say, well, if we repeat it, maybe Sometime after 10 years, it'll start to do some good. That's a hypothetical. You can't know. But we can know that it won't do any good for 10 years. And that's not acceptable. That's the wrong approach. That's a political approach whose purpose is to divide suburban women from the Republican Party. That is the meta strategy of what's going on here, and it's not about saving the lives of anyone, or especially not saving the lives of school children. On magazines, the National Institute of Justice said, well, this would do some good if you could confiscate all the existing supply of magazines. Well, that's tens of millions, and that will, among other things, endanger the lives of the law enforcement officers who would be in charge of having to carry out what could only work if it was done through house-to-house searches and confiscation. And then on what is called universal background checks. Very popular idea when you say it at the three-word title, but not effective when you look into how it would operate. The National Institute of Justice said there is no way this can be enforced unless we have universal gun registration. Well, we know how universal gun registration works because our neighbor Canada tried it. They enacted it. It cost literally 100 times more than the promise was made about the expenses of it. It was a complete fiasco. There was massive disobedience by the Canadians, who tend to be a lot more obedient to government than Americans. And it was such a disaster that it was repealed, having been enacted in the mid-1990s. It was repealed last year by Canada's Parliament. Now, how about the universal background check, so-called bill, that passed Colorado, the Colorado State House on Monday? Well, people think they like it because they say, well, yeah, some guy meets somebody else via Craigslist, and then they sell the gun, and it's a transaction between complete strangers. Should there be a background check on that? A lot of people say yes. But this bill is far, far, far more than that. It is an instrument for the destruction of the lawful ownership and use of firearms. Let me give you some examples. The only ways, there are very limited exceptions about when a person can give not sell, but just temporarily hand over for a few minutes a gun to another person. One is if you're at a target shooting range. That's fine. Another is if you're actually out in the field while hunting. You can do that. But let me tell you some times when you can't. I'm an NRA certified firearms instructor for the handgun course and for personal protection in the home. To follow the NRA curriculum, and the NRA is besides being America's oldest civil rights organization, is also America's oldest gun safety organization, founded in 1871. If I'm going to follow that high-level NRA curriculum for how to teach people about safe gun handling, one of the things we do is in the classroom, not at the target range, but in one of the early parts of the instruction, in the classroom, I'll bring in some guns. Absolutely no ammunition allowed in the classroom, not even my own. I bring in some firearms, and then I can bring in some dummy ammunition, some inert plastic in the shape of rounds of ammunition. And under my supervision, the students practice loading and unloading the guns, pulling the trigger, and those kinds of things, getting that basic safe operation of the gun before you ever go out to a target range with live ammunition. Under the bill that passed the Colorado legislature, under the bill written by Michael Bloomberg, that's a crime. Every time I do that, when I take one of my guns and hand it to a student without having put that student through a background check, that's a crime punishable by up to 18 months in jail in Colorado. And then when the student wants to hand it back to me, we have to do another background check on me to get it back. And both ways on that transaction, it costs $20. And that applies to every single transaction, temporary transfer of a firearm during a safety class. There are exceptions, supposedly, for people, and by the way, in Colorado, where the check is done by the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, it's not an instant check. That's the law the legislature enacted, but the Colorado Bureau of Investigation is flagrantly violating that. Delays of hours have been standard for years. The delay now is approximately 3 days or more, and has sometimes been illegally up to 9 days. And under conditions like that, you can't possibly run a gun safety class properly. There's another exception in the bill. So what if somebody needs a gun in an emergency? Can they borrow it from somebody? Well, not really. The only conditions under which you can temporarily give someone else custody of a firearm for self-defense is, first of all, it has to be within the home of the person who's receiving it. So you can't go, the victim, potential victim, can't go to a neighbor's house and pick up the gun there. But more importantly, the standard for when it can be transferred is the same standard as when it's legal to shoot someone in self-defense, when you are in imminent danger of death or serious bodily injury. So what does that mean in practice? A woman has a guy who's stalking her and keeps calling her on the phone and threatening her. And she goes to a friend and says, "Can I borrow a gun for a few days till I can buy my own?" Because it takes 3 days to buy one in Colorado or more but I don't know when this guy's going to come over. It's Saturday night. Maybe he'll come over tonight. Maybe he won't come over. Maybe he'll come over on Sunday morning. Who knows? Well, under Colorado law, sensibly, if she happened to see that person on the street somewhere, she couldn't just shoot him, because even though he's made these threats, he hasn't actually initiated an attack. So because the threat has not risen to the level at which she would be justified in pulling the trigger, she is, by the law which the Colorado House of Representatives passed and which Michael Bloomberg's lobby wrote, she is prohibited from obtaining a gun for her protection. And you say, well, why don't you just go to a store and buy a gun? Well, maybe there's no gun store open on Saturday night, and in Colorado, it takes you 3 days for the instant background check to clear at best, by which time she can be dead. Of course, the bill also has a war on Christmas. It's illegal under this bill for your father-in-law to give you a present, a gun as a present for Christmas. It's illegal for you to loan your gun to your sister. You can sell your gun to your sister, but you can't loan it to her. And it's illegal for a guy who's on his deathbed to have his friends come around and give his various guns to them. You can do it. After he dies, he can do it. The gun can pass by the execution of his estate, but no transfers are allowed when he's alive, and he can actually see the friend while he's handing him the firearm. These aren't bugs in the law. These are features. Michael Bloomberg is not someone. There are many people, including me, who believe you can have strong gun rights and reasonable gun controls. Michael Bloomberg isn't in that category. He is a prohibitionist. He brags about how little gun ownership there is in New York City. He wouldn't even let the National Guard come into the city to restore order against the looters in South Brooklyn after Hurricane Sandy because they would be carrying guns. He is a true anti-gun extremist. Another bill is this fee for background checks, which results in $20 per transfer. And maybe that's not a big deal for someone who's buying a $400 gun in a store, but when you expand when this is required, so that when somebody's teaching people at Boy Scout camp how to use firearms and hands a gun to the Boy Scout, or in my safety classes, or the woman who needs a gun in a hurry, it does become a serious burden. Notably, we have so many things for which fees can be charged, filing an appeal in a civil case and many, many other things. But we also routinely exempt from those fees people for whom they would be a genuine hardship. Someone who isn't buying a $700 gun, but might be buying a $110 gun at a pawn shop with a background check, because that's all she can afford. the majority in the House voted down something to say for people below the poverty line, however you want to define that, whether you're on food stamps or Medicaid eligible or whatever, to exempt those people from this poll tax on their perhaps temporary acquisition of a firearm. And then, of course, there's the ban where the current House undoes what the Colorado House did in 2003, which is enact a strong law about the right of licensed people who pass a 10-point fingerprint-based background check, pay fees of over $100, and pass a safety training class to carry firearms in public places and on public property throughout the state. The bill to outlaw licensed carry on all college campuses was promoted by people such as Representative Joe Salazar, who made remarks saying, well, people talk about resisting rape. Well, how do you know? Maybe you might make a mistake. Maybe the guy you think is trying to rape you really isn't, and then you go pop, 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 and you shoot him. I don't know. Maybe when somebody like puts his hands around your neck and starts strangling you, maybe he's there just to announce the delivery of flowers from an anonymous admirer. But this is the view. This is the view of the majority of the Democratic caucus in the Colorado House, that people are in general, including women, adult women on college campuses, are too incompetent to be able to use firearms responsibly for self-defense. And there was one notable amendment to this bill that was defeated, and that was to say, okay, you want to outlaw, in effect, self-defense on college campuses? Let's just do a study. Let's just have the state government collect the data and report on whether or not victimization, rape, robbery, assaults, homicides increases on college campuses in Colorado after this enacted. And that, of course, that amendment was defeated as well. Representative Claire Levy, the sponsor of the campus gun ban, said, well, no, we shouldn't do that because there might be an aberration which would distort the data. I'll tell you what the aberration is: Virginia Tech. And this bill makes Colorado campuses a safe zone for mass murderers and for more ordinary violent criminal predators. And they don't want, the sponsors of this don't want the public to see the data and to see the dangers that are going to result from outlawing self-defense on campuses. Thank you very much.
Jeanne, you're up.
It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm grateful to have the invitation. They asked me today to share a little bit about what happened 5 years ago, December 9th, 2007. And I have about 10 minutes, so I'm going to get right to the gist of the story. The gunman in my case had already killed people in Arvada, Colorado, at this facility called Youth with a Mission. He had shot 4 young people, 24-year-olds, and he killed 2 of them. And then he escaped and went home to sleep in his own bed in Inglewood. And the next day was Sunday, December 9, and I was a very well-trained police officer. I was a volunteer on the security team at this New Life Church because it's such a big church. It's like 12,000 members, and I just thought it would be fun to be part of the team. So we just wore regular plain clothes, and they had asked me to be armed, of course, because of my training. And I wasn't going to go to church that day because I was a brand new believer, and I was actually on a 3-day fast. It was the 3rd day of my fast. And I was trying to see if God was going to give me an answer for direction in my life. Should I stay in law enforcement or do something else? And I was certain I was going to hear from God about my future. And so I absolutely said, I'm not going to go to church today. I'm just going to stay home. And I got up and happened to look on the internet, and I saw that there had been this shooting in Arvada, and I didn't know what YWAM, Youth with a Mission, was. I just know I saw the words. It was a Christian facility, and the gunman had not been apprehended. And I just, man, something told me, I just got chills in the back of my neck, and something told me to get to New Life Church. And, you know, Colorado Springs is like 70 miles south of where Arvada is, you know, approximately. And so I had no way of knowing. I just really had this strong gut feeling. And I had been 3 days without food. I wasn't delusional. It was just a very strong feeling to get to the church. So I called the director of our security team, and I said, "Did you hear about this shooting?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, I'm coming in. And so, you know, I'm in the shower thinking, I might not be coming home today. I mean, that's how sure I was. I could be killed. And but I wasn't afraid. I just, you know, it was just something that I had contemplated. So I lived very close to the church, and when I arrived, I had missed most of the first service, and there's 2 services, and we had a lot of extra people that day because we had a guest speaker, and I was out in the lobby area, and we were just, the description of the suspect was very vague. It was just a white male in his 20s. There was no height or weight or anything, you know, possible beard. And as a police officer, you know, that's common. You just go with your gut. And so the first service is done with. There were extra Colorado Springs police there because of this potential gunman. And the second service comes and goes. I'm leaving out a lot of details because I've only got, 8 minutes now? So
You're good.
the rest is in my book.
Yeah, there you go.
And no, I'm not trying to be a smart aleck. I'm being very serious here. So the second service, again, very crowded. It was very cold that day. We were supposed to get a snowstorm, but it didn't hit. It was just very cold out. And second service ends. People are mingling. Usually they cleared out of there pretty quickly, but today they hung around for some reason. And the off-duty Colorado Springs police were apparently done with their, they thought it was okay to leave. I remember one standing next to me, and he looked at his watch and he said, "Well, I'm out of here." And it was like 12:45. And I looked around and I'm like, I'm staying. There's still so many people here. There were several thousand people still on campus. And another security team member said, "I'm staying too." And once I got to the church, I wasn't thinking, oh, the gunman's going to show up, But I was very vigilant and just very aware of everything, aware of my surroundings, aware of the strange feel in the church even. And I think most of the people in the church weren't even aware of this shooting in Arvada. So everybody was happy-go-lucky and everything. The police all left in their, they were in uniform, they left in their squads. And that is what the gunman was waiting for. He had been waiting in his car in the parking lot for an hour, because we can peg, cell phone towers can peg your cell phone and find your location. So as soon as they left, he made his move. And he had dropped a smoke grenade someplace. And people had made me aware of, hey, somebody, there's like a smoke grenade outside. And again, I wasn't thinking, oh, it's the gunman. I was just thinking, oh, it could be anything. We've got 12,000 members. There's lots of young people. But it was odd, and fast forwarding a little bit again, I was in the front lobby by the front doors, and I heard a pop, pop, pop noise, and I immediately made my way to the east hallway, which was just a few feet away. And the east hallway is approximately 100 yards, 100 meters long, and about 30 feet wide. It's very large, and it houses all the, the daycare and the adult special needs, preschoolers, and teenage. It's got all the classrooms and everything. And the hallway was just absolutely packed with people. The church was still packed with people. And then I hear these loud, I knew my ears just immediately became alert when I heard these pop, pop noises. But then when I heard just the loud, thundering cracks of the high-powered rifle, I took the gun out of the waistband of my jeans, and I'm like, where is he? I couldn't see because it was like the length even further than the back of this room, and there was just so many people running and screaming, and they were shouting, get down, he's got a gun. And one of the security team members behind me, who was really tall, he's like, there he is, Jeanne, he's coming in the doors right now. So at the opposite end of where I stood, here is, the gunman had been shooting inside the church with his AR-15, which he had recalibrated and made it even more powerful from a 5.6 to a 6.8. So the bullets were even more powerful. And I just, without hesitation, I just sprinted down the hallway toward him, and everybody's running past me. And just all of a sudden, no one was in that hallway, which was a miracle. Everybody found a place to hide. And so he's opening up the last set of these two glass doors, and he had his AR-15 he had a shoulder with a shoulder strap, so we could open up the door. And I stopped running, and I'm walking, and I'm like, okay, I think now would be a good time to take cover. And so I had gotten pretty far up the hallway running, and there was a hallway that was perpendicular to the east hallway that he was coming down. And I was going to wait for him to come just even with me, and then I was going to shoot him. But it just didn't feel right, and I was like, God, please just be with me. And I just had seconds to come up with a good, solid game plan. This was seconds. And I took about 7 steps out, and I shouted at him, police officer, drop your weapon. And he turns with his AR-15, and I fired 5 times rapidly, and I knocked him down completely on his back. And I'm walking toward him quickly with my gun pointed at him, and I'm warning him, drop your weapon or I will kill you. I wanted him to drop his weapon. And instead, he sits up and shoots at me. So we're shooting at each other in the middle of the hallway, which is another miracle that he didn't hit me. And I hit him again, and he couldn't stand up. He then tried to get away, which it would have been fine if he would have given up, but he he just collapses completely on his back, and his head's propped up. And I had seen, he had explosives, and he had planted explosives around the parking lot, and I don't know where else, but I had seen grenades on he had a weight-bearing vest, which is not a bulletproof vest. It just holds he had 30-round magazines for his AR-15, and he had a backpack on him. So he had like 1,700 rounds on him, and he had another 1,000 rounds in the trunk and an AK-47. He wasn't stopping at New Life. He was going on, and he had maps to other locations. He had money. And so when I saw that he was going to pull the pin of this grenade, I was, if he would have done that, not only would everybody in those classrooms who had been hiding have perished, so would I. So I had to shoot him again, and I knew without question that I had then just killed him. And it was interesting because somebody immediately runs up, and he wasn't part of the team or anything. He just was screaming he was just screaming. He's like, he goes, "That was the coolest thing I have ever seen." And he's like, "How did you do that?" And it was insane because I was coughing, and there's gunpowder, and another security team member runs up, and I'm like, "Get this guy away from me." And I mean, this was just wild, and this guy's like screaming this victory, and we had heard that there were possibly 3 gunmen instead of 1, and in my gut I knew there was just this one. I knew he was the same one from our vat. I just had that gut feeling. But the other security team member says, "Go check the lobby." So I run down, check the lobby, clear it, and then I saw all the Colorado Springs squads, they're screeching to a halt in the front, and then they're going over by the east entrance where they had heard that he was coming in. So that's pretty much what happened.
Okay, we've got an absolutely expert panel. This is not a debate panel. As you can see, the panelists all are pretty synonymous in viewpoints on Second Amendment and policy issues. But we do have time, 12 minutes to be exact, for a couple of questions. So if you have them, go ahead. Go ahead and start. And it's not necessary that we hear from all 4 on all of the answers. So I'll try to moderate that so that we can look at all these people lined up here. All right. Keep in mind, we now have 11 minutes, but we'll get these questions in. Go ahead. Start.
Jeanne, it's nice to see you again, and everybody please buy her book. It's great. And she lives in Denver now, and she's, last time I talked to her, she was looking for a job, so I'll put in a plug for you. Maybe that'll help. I am Kelsey Alexander. I'm from the LPR class of 2006, and I'm a capitalist, and I would invite you all to come to the Centennial Gun Club and learn to shoot. And if you'd like to come as my guest, talk to me afterwards. Mary Catherine, you had some great ideas on what we should say, but we said all of those things last week in the House testimony, every single one of them.
Right.
Those arguments don't work for the legislatures. Kopel, you are exactly right. The agenda is coming from somewhere else, and I don't know how we're going to beat it in Colorado. But I would just like to suggest that elections matter, and so does money. Elections weren't mentioned in this panel, and what do you think of that?
Well, let me add that I agree and sympathize. I was speaking more on a national level where I think it's less likely that anything will pass, which is why they're going to states. And as far as elections mattering, the fact that we have a great number of Republican governors and a huge number of Republican houses and senates in the states actually is to our benefit right now, even though it doesn't feel like it at the moment in Colorado. But on a state level, I do think we have earned ourselves some defense against this kind of thing. But yes, ultimately what matters is when guns become normalized for many people, and you get 4.5 million people as part of a Second Amendment organization. That's ultimately what changes people's minds. That's what's keeping every single one of these red state Democrats from voting on something like an assault weapons ban. And so my arguments that I talk about making, maybe they don't stop every piece of legislation, but they are able to maybe change some hearts and minds, and that's part of what we have to do.
My name is Terry Dodd.
Supplement what Mary Catherine said, that people who believe in the Constitution can outspend Michael Bloomberg, but they have something which he doesn't, which is genuine grassroots, and that's what's kept the Second Amendment alive throughout the last 50 years of culture war against it. It's not a Republican versus Democrat issue. There's good and bad people in both parties on the issue. But what will save the Second Amendment or not in 2014 is people getting out and volunteering and saying, you know, we made a mistake when in 2012 we were kind of apathetic and the NRA was warning us about what Obama was going to do in his second term. And they said, well, he hasn't done that much in his first term on guns, so what's to worry about? Now we see those warnings coming true. In every state legislature, there will be the opportunity, including Colorado, the opportunity to remove the legislators who sided with the bigots and elect the legislators who believe in tolerance and the Constitution.
This question right here.
My name is Terry Dodd. I'm from Douglas County. My rights to defend myself and to bear arms is a creator-granted right. I'd like to address this comment directly to Dave for starters, but I welcome any other comments. My rights are from God, from my Creator, not by any Constitution. The Constitution didn't give us any rights. I'm one of those guys out there that probably represents at least a third of the men in the country who believe in the principle of Malone Lave, that is, come and take them. I believe that the attack, the war that's being launched against the people, the citizens of our country, I believe that they don't have to take our guns. All they have to do is criminalize us to make the freedom movement impotent. And I'd like to hear Dave's opinion on that.
There, as some of the other panelists have talked about, part of the purpose of this, in this culture war, is hostility to the ability of independent self-protection, which the right to keep and bear arms represents. And so people who want everyone to be managed from cradle to grave by their superiors find that besides the particular details of the gun issue, that just gun ownership is an affront to that view. The American Revolution changed from a very heated political debate between the colonies and Great Britain on issues such as taxation without representation and the power of the royal governors and on, when the British decided to crack down on American gun ownership. The king in the fall of 1774 embargoed the import of guns and gunpowder into the United States. The royal governors, such as Gage in Massachusetts and Dunmore in Virginia, did pre-dawn seizures of places where that there were public stores of arms or ammunition. And then what turned this whole thing from a intense political debate into a war was house-to-house gun confiscation on the morning of April 19th, 1775 at Lexington and Concord. And that's when the shooting started, and it never stopped until the war was resolved. I would hope that the more prudent and responsible supporters of some gun laws recognize that when you cross that red line into confiscation, you are opening up Pandora's box.
Next question here.
Good afternoon. My name is Robert Gale. I'm from Manitou. Thank you all for coming, and especially Mary Catherine. Thanks for a eloquent speech on Lobby Day a few years back. But I do have a question, primarily for Dave. Is it possible to pass liability to our legislatures for the potential injury of people on our colleges if they, in fact, have removed the right to self-protection?
The answer to that is no. The only liability, the remedy is at the ballot box.
Well, we'll remedy at the ballot box.
Ross.
Hi, Ross Kaminsky from Netherlands. Just one quick comment. The level of sophistication of gun opponents was made clear to me when I heard Congresswoman Diana DeGette from Denver say that no hunter could ever possibly need a 30-round magazine because if you shot a deer with 30 rounds, you wouldn't be able to use the meat. crazy. Here's my question, maybe for Trevor, perhaps. Anecdotally, we've seen these mass shootings at every level of school and churches and movie theaters, gun-free zones, and I'm wondering if there's any data. Those are kind of anecdotes. Is there any data about whether gun-free zones attract criminals and attract shooters?
Yeah, unquestionably. I believe it's 2 of 50 in the last two times. Only 2 times has it been in a non-gun-free zone. We know specifically in the Aurora shooting here, Mr. Holmes, I believe his name was, had many closer theaters than the one in Aurora, which he chose was a gun-free zone. These people are crazy, but they're not irrational. I mean, it's a very different thing. And so one of the things, again, that's always worth highlighting when you talk about this is when shooters such as Jeanne and many other people who practice lawful self-defense stop a shooting, we don't have a national debate about that. We don't have a Piers Morgan special on that. The bias is in the sampling and how people talk about it. So the very same week as Newtown, Connecticut, there were 2 times that people stopped a shooting, and we were all talking about Newtown, but once in San Antonio at a movie theater that was not a gun-free zone because it's Texas. So that was one time just a few days after, and also at the Clackamas Mall in Oregon, which said it was a gun-free zone, but hey, the guy with the gun walked right past it. The idea of a gun-free zone is, in an article of Dave's I highly commend, is a deadly fiction that really illustrates how much this is about sanctity and purity and like keeping these out of an area like a diversity zone or a hate-free zone. It's all words, and it's very dangerous to people who are there.
I just wanted to echo real quick about sometimes the utter ignorance of gun opponents of actual guns or gun laws. I was actually on with Juan and Bill O'Reilly right at the beginning of this whole debate, and Juan suggested a federal law that had already passed post-Virginia Tech massacre with like 98% of the Senate behind it, and so he had no idea what sort of laws were already there. And B, I had to say to them at one point, you guys know all of them are semi-automatic basically, right? Like they have no clue. They were saying, well, why don't we just ban the semi-automatic ones? And I said, all right. So explaining that and pointing that out is sometimes helpful. If you want to make new laws, you should probably learn what the ones are that are in place. And the other thing, I just want to echo exactly what you said earlier about people like Jeanne and civilians also who stop these incidents becoming household names, and making it our job to make that happen, because it's disrespectful to the people. And of course, Jeanne's not looking to be a big hero, I'm sure, and she's not like, wanting her ticker tape parade, but these are the folks who really do protect us, and their stories are ignored blatantly, willfully, on purpose. And I think bringing those to light, in fact, the gun opponents were using data right after Newtown to suggest that no civilian had ever stopped a mass shooting. Well, the way they classified it was a mass shooting had to be 4 or more people died. Well, a lot of them stopped them before they kill 4 people. Like, this is a good thing. And so I think that is an important part, making those folks, really, I mean, Jeanne here is like the archetype of a hero in every crime drama on TV, and yet the liberals won't allow her to be one in real life. Let's give her a ticker tape.
This will be the last question. Sorry for everyone else in line. Sir, go ahead.
Well, good afternoon. It's actually not a question. It's more of a thank you. Jeanne, just so you know, I was the 4th ambulance that went in on that scene on that Sunday. And I will tell you, my personal thing that was going on that day was I decided not to go to church, but instead to go on a shift that was open. And I remember when the calls went out, they said it was possibly a shooting, and then it said there was an escalating, and we had more people being injured. I just want you to know, ma'am, and I want you to keep this in your mind, it was truly divine intervention that day that put you in that place, and we thank God for you and those that are willing to stand up and take out those that are going to hurt the rest of us. God bless you, ma'am.
Well, once again, thank you to our great panel and great ideas, intellectual ammunition to to win our war for freedom that we're all engaged in. And I think it's, Mary Katherine said it just right. Jeanne probably doesn't expect hero status from us, but the leadership program of the Rockies is, we do regard capitalism as the business of heroes. And so if it's divine intervention that propels you to buy her book, you should. So do that. Thank you again to our panel.